The state of the Joburg CBD has been in the spotlights in recent days, with government accused of failing to clean the streets. In fact, Environment MMC Jack Sekwaila has been quoted as attributing this to homeless people. Now, this has brought into sharp focus the needs of the homeless and ways through which municipalities across the country are responding to their plight. So let's unpack the story for you now. We're hoping to be joined by the MMC at some stage, but for now, let's bring in Raymond Perrier, who's the director at the Denis Hurley Center. And Ray, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much indeed for speaking to us. In fact, the MMC is being quoted as attributing the deteriorating state of the Joburg CBD to homeless people. Hopefully you'll be able to clarify what he meant by that. But on the face of it, is that a fair statement?
I think we always need to be careful about using phrases like the homeless and blaming a group collectively for something. It's as bad as talking about the whites, the blacks, the Muslims. Obviously, within the homeless community, there are some people whose behavior is less than exemplary, but that's true of any group of people. There are also, within the homeless people, some people who are really keen to work and really keen to turn their lives around. So it's never helpful to blame a whole group of people for the actions of a few.
Yeah, and on the face of it, once again, it almost seems like there's a whole lot more to the story than, you know, what meets the eye. I mean, we know that typically if you do ignore the plight of any community, like you mentioned, and we could slice this in any way you want, but if you ignore the plight of people, typically there are consequences to that. And I imagine there's still a few gaps that municipalities are able to plug in order to ensure that the homeless community doesn't resort to the kind of, I don't know, even safety measures that may very well put the city's safety at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. All of the research about homelessness, whether it's in Gauteng, in eThekwini, where I'm from, and in KZN, shows that homelessness in South Africa is fundamentally an economic problem which becomes a social problem. It's young people, mostly young men, moving from the countryside into cities, looking for work. They don't find work, and they end up on the streets. And then once they're on the streets, they're looking for means for survival. And it's unfortunate, not unfortunate, it's a failure of our government policies that we can't have absorb people into the economy at the level of skill that they have and the work that they're looking for. And that's why people resort to what they do. I'm not in any way condoning criminality, but I am recognizing that for some people it's a means of survival.
Yeah, so there's a macroeconomic condition under which this is taking place. But when we talk specifically about how government responds to those who are looking for homes, where are the gaps?
Well, I think the biggest gap is a failure to engage directly with the community affected. We are seeing some progress in that, and I have to commend Gauteng and actually both the cities of Joburg and Botswana, because they are now talking to homeless people, talking to organizations who work with the homeless, and trying to understand the problem from the inside rather than from the outside. Unfortunately, for example, that's not true in eThekwini, where the city council in Durban comes up with all kinds of bizarre policies which actually harm the homeless and don't engage with the people who understand the situation on the ground. Once you engage with homeless people, you recognize the people who are looking for work and what kind of work that they're looking for, the people who are looking for shelter, the people who are looking for drug rehabilitation, and you avoid the trap of demonizing the whole group. One thing I would always suggest is that we talk about not about the homeless, but about homeless citizens. Once we start referring to them as homeless citizens, I think our perspective on who homeless people are changes quite dramatically.
Yeah, language is certainly important, and let me just apologize to our viewers. Ray, we seem to have a kind of intermittent connection to you, but hopefully it holds throughout our discussion. But I want to just hone in on what you just mentioned, you know, this idea of language and being able to use the right language in order to, at the very least, not contribute even inadvertently to the kind of difficulties and challenges that the homeless or people who are looking for homes are facing.
Absolutely. It's interesting we're having this conversation on Good Friday, and for a vast number of South Africans, this is the day in which they walk with Jesus on that road to Calvary. Jesus was condemned because he was scapegoated. He was treated as a way of blaming a lot of the ills of his society at the time on him. And we continue to do as we will. And now the danger is we very often scapegoat the homeless or the refugees as if they're somehow responsible for our own failures as a society.
Yeah. As we speak about this, I mean, this is obviously not a unique problem to this country, but I do wonder whether there are any particular countries, at least from the work that you do, who stand as some kind of beacon about how to address this long-standing challenge. I mean, as you've mentioned, the state of being without a home is one, that has been documented even in the history books, quite frankly. And one certainly gets the sense that each generation struggles to find meaningful solutions to it.
There are some really good models from around the world. There are what they call home-first models, housing-first models, where they're trying to get people into accommodation. Once people are stable, they're much more likely to hold down a job. They're much more likely to become responsible members of society. There are good models at looking at how you help people with addictions, which are not just based on trying to cure an addiction overnight, but rather minimizing the harm that the addiction causes by supporting people through a medical program. Addiction. Obviously, there are training programs. Unfortunately, a lot of what is designed in South African cities by municipalities is based on almost a fantasy view about what might work rather than a practical understanding on the ground. I'll give you an example. In eThekwini, we were working with a pretty senior official on a program of using homeless people, not as seeing them as the problem, but as a solution to the problem. Again, the problem of litter and debris in our area of the city. We had a really great program planned, and then at the last minute, some higher official in eThekwini just kiboshed the whole thing and said, no, we can't do that. We can't support homeless people. And it was just bizarre that something really quite small and really not expensive was condemned without even being tried. And I'm afraid there is a bit of a tendency on the part of a lot of government officials to demonize the homeless and never to see them as a solution to the problem, always to see them as the problem. But I'm pleased to recognize that, for example, in Joburg, there is a recognition that the homeless people who are involved in waste collection, in recycling, some of them are working with Pick It Up, are working with the municipal waste collection service and trying to integrate what they offer.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating discussion, and hopefully we'll be able to delve deeper into some of the nuances at a different time where hopefully there's a better connection to you as well. But for now, Raymond, Perrier, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Appreciate your time. Raymond is the director at the Denis Hurley Center. Once again, thanks very much indeed.